All right, folks. Hey, this is Keith Weber from ISU's GIS Training and Research Center, and we're ready to kick off what's going to be the final tech talk with the GIS Trek for the calendar year. Our presenter today is Pam Bond from the city of Boise, and she's going to be doing the third of our metadata presentations, and this one specifically is looking at creating your metadata documentation in ArcGIS Online. I'd like to let you know that we actually have another metadata topic coming up, which will kick off 2021 for us early in January. In that fourth metadata webinar is going to be looking at a new tool for ArcGIS Pro. It's called the EPA Metadata Pro Editor. It was developed by Innovate, and those folks, Max over there at Innovate, is going to be doing our presentation early in January. You're not going to want to miss that one either. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to Pam to go through our presentation for the day.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and get started here. So today I'll be talking a little bit about ArcGIS Online metadata options. We'll go over layer level metadata, talking about item details, enabling metadata in your organization's ArcGIS Online, and even maybe talk about some options for hosting your own metadata online. So layer level metadata, really this starts in ArcGIS Pro, and for those of you who haven't transitioned to Pro and still using ArcMap, I think you can also do this in there as well. I will be, talking about Pro here, but so I'm going to pop over and show you. So inside of ArcGIS Pro, this would be where you would publish your services, right? So inside of here, before you publish it, you can go in and take a look at the properties of your layer. And so in this case, you can have two options. You can have the layer has its own metadata, which you can author, or you can show metadata from the data source. This is read-only, and this actually comes from the metadata that you had authored for that layer. So if you went out to your catalog and looked at the metadata, that would be this metadata you see here. If you wanted to limit this in some way or change it up for your web services, you could click on this layer has its own metadata and use this to maybe make it a little bit different. And so here you can also insert metadata having to do with the actual map itself. And in this case, I only have neighborhood associations because I publish my layers out singularly, but you can populate those as well. And so when you go out to share your layer, just as an example, I won't publish it out because it already exists. That information will actually populate in there for you, and so that will save you some time. And one thing that's nice about this is, especially if you're playing around or having to publish it out like multiple times or something, that information is always there. It's always populated for you. So if we go out to ArcGIS Online, you can see some of this has already been added in for me. So I would just say that's a good, let's see. That's a good way for you to author some metadata before you're even publishing it. That could make your life a little bit easier. So you don't have to author all of it once you get into ArcGIS Online. So that's just one way to kind of maybe not have to do some redundant typing having to do with metadata for your layers. So think about that before you even publish up your layers to ArcGIS Online. And then item details. I don't know how many of you saw the Esri webinar that Byrne did yesterday. He actually covered quite a bit of this, but I consider item details in ArcGIS Online to kind of be like metadata for the layperson. You can put a lot of the information that you would in a metadata standard file here, but you can also use this as an opportunity to drive users to other useful information. So if we come back out to that layer here, so I've actually done, a little bit of modification of my metadata out here to include some links that could drive the users to useful content on the City of Boise's website, or drive them to different initiatives associated with that layer, and just getting people more information for what they're looking for, give them kind of a holistic picture. And this is also your opportunity to let people know, what the layer is visually. So, at the City of Boise, we kind of have this like branded thumbnail that we like to use, and it gives them, the name of it, what it is, and then maybe a little bit of an indicator of what that layer is, just at a glance. Here, it's also great to include something like your terms of use, and I would recommend doing that for anything that you're going to be publishing publicly, for sure. You can obviously set up things like categories, putting your tags in here to help with searching, put your attributions in there. And one thing that's really nice here is this item information. If any of you haven't noticed this before, this is actually a really great tool for filling out good metadata on your item details page. So if you see here, it says my top improvement is add a longer summary. And if I click on that, it would actually take me up to this summary box, and you could type something more in there. I don't feel like I need it, so I'm not going to, but it gives you some ideas. And if you click on this Learn More button, it'll actually go through the things that, kind of a checklist of things you can do to improve your metadata. So in this case, I don't have a check here, but all these other I do. I have a thumbnail, my description, a good title, some tags in terms of use. And here, this is actually kind of a status bar that you can see it's not all the way up to high because it has that one recommendation. And so if you had less complete item information, then it may be down here lower. So again, especially on the information that you're putting out publicly, I highly recommend spending some time on your item details. And when you start doing this, like it seems a little bit tedious, like all metadata authoring seems, but the more you do it, the faster you get at it. I don't feel like this is a heavy lift anymore. Like once you kind of decide on things like thumbnails and you make this kind of workflow for how you do it, you can copy and paste your terms of use from another from another item in your ArcGIS Online organization. Things of that nature really help out. So I would definitely explore that. And so let's go back to this here. And in this presentation, I've included some links to more information about this if you're interested, and I think Keith will send that out with the recording. So we talked about that item information, kind of an interactive checklist where it makes suggestions. And one of the things to know too is the better, I feel like I ran across this somewhere where it's like the more information, the better you are at completing that information. And especially if you've marked it as authoritative, it will like bump your information up in the ArcGIS Online search so that people will more easily find your content. So then you can actually also enable metadata in your ArcGIS Online organization. And this would be something that your administrator would do. You could go out to your, we could go show you here. So if you go out to your organization and go to the items tab, it's just a toggle here that allows you to enable that. And you can pick between some different standards here. And all that really does is open up a viewer, a metadata viewer and editor. That looks kind of like this. And some things to note about the metadata editor is it does have this built-in validation tool. So once you've started adding in information here, you can click on that validate button and it will let you know if there's anything required that's missing based off of the standard that you selected. And then you can also import existing metadata XML from file. Now this is, I put an asterisk there because right now, the only format that it will accept is that ArcGIS metadata format. So if for your data, you're using something like FGDC or ISO, you would need to transform or translate that to the ArcGIS metadata. I think you can just export it out in that format, and then you can use that to update your metadata. So I'll be honest that we don't really use this at the City of Boise, because I know that I've used it in the past and I just found it kind of tedious. Because you also would like have to keep this up to date here as well, right? Like it's not, I don't know that's necessarily tied to anything that will just update automatically. So I guess I found that to be more work than it was worth. But if it's something that your organization is willing to put in the work on and wants to use, you know, I would explore this option. So if we go to the next slide here. So we'll go out and take a look at that editor really quick here. So here you can see that there's now metadata button that shows up, and if you disable that metadata in your organization through the admin tools, that button will just go away, but the metadata doesn't necessarily go away. So here's just starting up the editor, and like I said, we don't really use this, so I haven't filled in a lot of information, but you can go through all the tabs here and put in whatever you like. And if you click that validate button, it's kind of handy in that you can click on it, it will actually take you to that place so that you're able to fill in that information and hit all of those marks that at least are required. So that's handy. So just a few things I wanted to mention that I learned about the metadata editor. If you publish an item from a shapefile or a file geodatabase and it contains metadata, it will be included in your hosted layers. So not everybody publishes out from ArcMap or ArcPro. Registered ArcGIS server service metadata doesn't really come along for the ride. It only gives you those like item details. So you'd have to actually upload that ArcGIS metadata XML file to get that full metadata. And any metadata associated with a layer is automatically included when it's exported from a hosted feature layer as a shapefile or file geodatabase. So that's a really nice thing. If you do use that metadata editor, the metadata you create will come with anything that like an outside user, if they exported from your hosted feature layer as a shapefile or file geodatabase. And I put a link here to some more information about that. And like I mentioned before with that, something else to note with that enabling and disabling metadata in ArcGIS Online, if you disable it, the metadata that's associated with files that you've already added to won't necessarily go away. It still exists there. People just won't be able to get to it. That metadata button for item will just disappear. But it will still be there. So, you know, for those of you who are interested in using, I'd be curious to hear how you come up with a workflow to kind of keep that up to date. I'm sure it's totally possible, and somebody could get really creative with Python or something. So another option having to do with metadata is you could host it yourself. Again, like you'd have to think about how you want to maintain that. In some cases, it might be easier to maintain it in your own way. It gives you some more flexibility, and you don't have to use that built-in editor or translate your metadata that's already in a different standard. And so like one example that I found that I thought was pretty good was from IDWR. I don't know if we have anyone from IDWR on here, but they actually are using, this is actually like a ArcGIS open data page that they've just customized to allow them to show their data in different categories, and this links out to their open data, but then also you can see their metadata through here, which is kind of nice. And this may actually be linking out to that ArcGIS Online metadata. So that's pretty neat. So yeah, we'll go out and actually look here at this one. Wonder if I, sure. So yeah, I don't have anything populated, so it's not showing up. But this looks like it's actually pointing right out to their metadata. I know that in the past, when I was working with Fish and Game, we would actually host metadata out onto a web server, and then inside of this description here, I just have a link that would say, like, you know, FGDC metadata, and then people could pull it up and see it just in a web browser, or maybe pull it down and look at it in a text editor or something like that. So you can get creative with that. You know, there's the nice thing about ArcGIS Online is it does give you some flexibility to have links and things in your open data pages. Like what IDWR has done, will give you some flexibility so you can play around with different options of what works for you. But at the end of the day, the goal is to have, you know, some kind of metadata. You want to be able to drive people to your content and make sure they know what it is and how often it's, you know, updated and all of that pertinent information. So with that, that's pretty much the end of my presentation. So if anyone has any questions or thoughts, I'd be, you know, really curious to hear if anybody else has some creative ways for maintaining their ArcGIS Online content metadata.
Thank you very much, Pam. Hey, folks, if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask that question, or if you don't have a microphone, see if you can get that typed into the chat line, and we'll see if we can get it answered.
And I'd be curious, like, is any of this, like, the fact that you can enable metadata in ArcGIS Online, like that, is that new information to anybody? Did anybody not know that?
Well, you know, when you were showing the metadata button in ArcGIS Online, I have gotten so accustomed to seeing it because I turned it on when it first became available. I didn't even know you could turn it off, I guess, and I've completely forgotten about that. So obviously some people could not have it turned on for their organization, and that was a very good tip because if they're not seeing that ability, then they can get with their admin to get that turned on and then make full use of metadata for their whole organization.
Yeah, so does anybody, I'd be curious if anybody like regularly uses this and how they deal with maintaining it. Do you just use the overwrite button to keep it up to date or update it manually?
Yep. That's very good stuff. And I think probably a lot of folks weren't even familiar with those capabilities. Any questions or comments, folks?